My name is Ulises Quero, and I am the Americas Program Coordinator here at Franciscans International, and I will be facilitating this discussion today. Before starting, I would like to inform you that this interpretation is going to be in English and Spanish. So this interpretation is available at the bottom of your screen. Para todos aquellos que nos están uniendo, informarles que este evento va a estar transmitido en inglés y en español. Entonces les pedimos que revisen la opción que mejor les convenga en la parte de interpretación. If you don't select anything, then you will listen to the original audio. We would like also to let you know that this event is going to be recorded, and we will share the recording after this event. Your Eminence, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to have you today. And on behalf of Misean Cara and Franciscans International, I would like to welcome you to the launching of this publication, Tearing Down the Walls, Challenging Myths about Migration from a Human Rights Perspective. This publication will be available in different languages at the end of this event. As you know, the world has been largely paralyzed by the COVID-19 pandemic, and the highly vulnerable situations in which the overwhelming majority of migrants and refugees find themselves have been further aggravated. Some migrants have been trapped in countries of transit without any means to access to the most basic levels of food, water, or health, as shelters and institutions had to close. Others have been detained in overcrowded centers, left without information and without protection against the spread of the virus. Millions of families, depending on the remittances sent by their migrants, relatives have been forced to survive without this essential financial support due to the economic crisis, lockdowns, and other measures. The lack of access to safe water and adequate housing in camps have rendered millions of refugees unable to comply with the most basic protection against COVID-19. Nevertheless, the pandemic is only a magnifying glass of structural problems that migrants and people forced to move more generally face in an everyday situation. In this context, Franciscans International, with the support of Misean Cara, is launching this new publication on migration that aims at challenging some of the myths and prejudices surrounding migration. This publication uses international human rights standards and state commitments to provide people working with migrants and refugees with arguments to promote their rights and dignity. So in this regard, and I would like to invite John Moffett, CEO from Misean Cara, to have a welcome address. Dear John, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ulysses, and good afternoon, everyone. Misean Cara, along with Franciscans International, is pleased to welcome you to this webinar and lunch event today. We are delighted to see so many people online from across the world for an important discussion on protecting migrants' rights. We are honoured to welcome His Eminence, Cardinal Michael Czerny, Under-Secretary of the Migrants and Refugees section at the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development at the Holy See, who is such a champion for justice and peace, for human rights and for migrants within the Vatican and across the world today. We are also delighted to have Ireland's ambassador to the Vatican, Derek Hannon, online, along with colleagues from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Irish Aid, and dozens of civil society representatives from faith organisations, non-governmental organisations, human rights groups, and more. We are having this discussion at a time when COVID-19 has had an unprecedented effect on people's movement around the world, as well as on public health, economics, social organisation, human rights, and other dimensions of human life. Pandemic-related measures restricting mobility have created new challenges for migrants, while often worsening their pre-existing vulnerabilities. And of course, this is happening in a wider context, where there are more migrants and displaced persons in the world than at any time since the Second World War, where xenophobia and racism have been growing, fueled by a surge in authoritarian populism, where international protection mechanisms have been strained to the point of breaking, with human rights commitments often ignored, and where 2018's Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration has not achieved much traction, or at least not yet. Too often, politicians, media, the UN, and even us justice activists talk of the scale of the migration crisis in the world today. In fact, we would be better off, as Cardinal Czerny has noticed, focusing on political will, human rights, and social accountability, since the scale of the situation is not insurmountable. Rather, it is poor policies, mismanagement, and self-interests that often characterize the response and generate the sense of crisis. In a narrow sense, Misean Cara comes to this event today through our funding to the Franciscans International that give rise to the publication that is being launched today. But that support, thanks to Irish aid, is rooted in Misean Cara's deliberate strategic intention to uphold the rights of people who have been forcibly displaced. In our strategy, Misean Cara particularly identified refugees and internally displaced persons among core target groups to focus on, alongside women, children, and persons with a disability. We did so because of our desire to align with the SDG principle of leaving no one behind. But Misean Cara is also very informed by bottom-up reflection of what missionary organizations and the communities where they work find to be relevant and important on the ground. We support both humanitarian needs and the human rights of people forcibly displaced by the climate crisis, violent conflict, or human rights abuses, whether that's within states or crossing borders, in diverse contexts from Southern Africa to Latin America, and from the Middle East to Central and Southeast Asia. Misean Cara supports initiatives that respond to immediate humanitarian needs and assists communities to access basic services that deliver on their human rights. It also funds initiatives addressing specific vulnerabilities of and duty bearers' human rights obligations towards displaced populations. The 3 to 6 project you will hear from later is a UNESCO recognized champion for the educational inclusion of refugees, migrants, and displaced people in South Africa, but it also addresses issues of status, identity records, access to other services, safety and security for target groups, advocating in line with the South African constitutional and legal provisions. And of course, having an increased focus on human rights under the strategic plan, Misean Cara is pleased to support initiatives that give communities and vulnerable groups access to formal human rights mechanisms. This is happening through the Franciscans International project that give rise to today's webinar and publication. Not alone is the document being launched important for Franciscan communities around the world, it will usefully inform the work of all Misean Cara members and their partners as to countries' human rights obligations towards migrants, regardless of their location, status, or circumstances. Being deliberately accessible, not least by being made available in 5 languages, it will be useful for projects, workers, and advocates at grassroots levels, which is where, at the end of the day, we want to achieve positive impact in migrant lives. So once again, Misean Cara is delighted to join with Franciscans International and welcome you to today's webinar. We look forward to your engagement and sharing of experience and information to help advance human rights and sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moffett, for your remarks. And now we're gonna go with the first part of this event. I just want to remind everyone that there is a Q&A section available at the bottom of your screen. So please do not hesitate to start asking your questions. Also, please provide to who you are addressing this question. And later in this event, we will take some of those questions to be part of the discussion. So now we're going to this part to this part of this webinar, and I have to say that we are very privileged with the panelists and speakers that we have today. They are basically coming from different parts of the world, so you will be listening to different situations. And first of all, and also in the interest of time, I would like to let you know that all the bios of the speakers will be available in our website. And in the interest of time, I won't be reading all the information and the activities that each of the speakers perform. However, this, as mentioned, will be available in the website. So to give the opening remarks, I would like to welcome His Eminence Cardinal Michael Czerny, Undersecretary of the Migrants and Refugees section of the Dicastery for promoting integral human development of the Holy See, to give these remarks. Your Eminence, it is an honor to have you with us today, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure and an honor for me to be with you also. In his testament, Francis of Assisi expressed the desire that his followers would spend their lives as pilgrims and strangers in the world. These words resonate in contemporary times, when more people than ever before are on the move. However, whereas the Franciscan journey is a free and conscious choice to venture out and build new fraternal relations, it is necessity and even violence, not choice, that drives all refugees and internally displaced people and many migrants to uproot and move. Such necessity marks my own history. I was born in what's now the Czech Republic, but I grew up in Canada because my parents worried about ethnic, political, and economic perils in post-war Czechoslovakia. With the concept of being on the move deeply ingrained in the Franciscan self-understanding, it is only natural that many followers of St. Francis have dedicated themselves to supporting migrants at risk across the world. By sharing their lives, whether briefly or for many years, they have grown sensitive to the dynamics that drive people to leave their homes. Forced or involuntary migrants suffer at all stages. First, when the circumstances at home become unbearable. Secondly, during their often long and perilous journeys. Thirdly, if they are confronted by stigma and hostility in where they come, if they are confronted by stigma and hospitality in their new land, and fourthly, if repatriated, with the difficulties of settling back in where they came from. The Church has tried to accompany each stage and is always learning new ways to do so. Pope Francis has intensified the Church's long-standing sympathy for these sufferings. Following his visit to Lampedusa and Lesbos, the Holy Father set up the Migrants and Refugee section, a small, action-oriented Vatican office, which, for the time being, he leads himself. Underway since January 2017, its mission is to help the Church make sure that those forced to flee are not shut out or left behind. Transitions, arrival, and settling down. 30 years ago, inspired by St. Francis's openness of heart, which knew no bounds and transcended differences of origin, nationality, color, or religion, the Franciscans established a presence at the United Nations to advance their work towards justice, peace, and care for creation. The publication we are launching today combines their advocacy in international fora, based on the first-hand experience of brothers and sisters on the ground, with relevant elements of international human rights law. Thus, it will serve as a tool to defend and support those in need. On the feast of St. Francis of Assisi this year, the Holy Father released the third encyclical letter of his papacy, Fratelli Tutti, on fraternity and social friendship. In this time of pandemic and social distancing, Francis reminds us that we ought to love our brothers and sisters as much when they are far away as when we are with them. The encyclical also demystifies migration, and it complements and supports your new publication in several ways. Let me recount a few. Early in the text, Pope Francis uses the Good Samaritan story to teach about reaching out and helping, and the radical distance that our active affection is challenged to bridge. It goes beyond paying attention and putting one's own agenda and welfare aside when another person needs help. In choosing a Samaritan as the exemplar in a story told to his fellow Jews, Jesus forcefully rejected 500 years of animosity between the two communities. This is how far people of goodwill must go to tear down the walls of comfortable silence and complicity that allow so much suffering in the world, amongst vulnerable people on the move and many others besides. The Bible recognizes tension between global and local, but affirms that we can live healthily within our own culture while striving for the common good of the whole of humanity. Each particular group becomes part of the fabric of universal communion, and there discovers its own beauty. All individuals, whatever their origin, know that they are part of the greater human family, without which they will not be able to understand themselves fully. Accordingly, we should accept our differences and cultivate the culture of encounter so as to transcend our divisions. This means working to create a many-faceted polyhedron whose different sides form a variegated unity in which the whole is greater than the part. The image of a polyhedron can represent a society where differences coexist, complementing, enriching, and reciprocally illuminating one another, even amid disagreements and reservations. Each of us can learn something from others. No one is useless and no one is expendable. This also means finding ways to include those on the peripheries of life, for they have another way of looking at things. They see aspects of reality that are invisible to the centers of power where weighty decisions are made. This positive vision contests the myths and misconceptions about migrants heard not only from uninformed citizens, but also from official authorities. It is my hope that this publication may help Franciscans, other faith-based groups, and civil society organizations to counter the misconceptions and the xenophobic and racist discourses that underpin abusive policies on human mobility. Faced with those injured by the dark traits of a closed world and still lying neglected by the roadside, we are invited by Pope Francis to realize the world's deep desire for fraternity, starting with the recognition that we are fratelli tutti, brothers and sisters all. Thank you very much, and God bless the publication as it does its good work among God's people.
Thank you so much, Your Eminence, for these opening remarks, but also thank you for also sharing with us part of your personal story and how this is also so important for you. Unfortunately, Your Eminence cannot be with us the whole event. However, we will pass any question or comment that you have about his presentation or any other comment so he can also address it. So now I would like to welcome Mrs. Sandra Epal-Ratjen, who is International Advocacy Director at Franciscans International, who will make the official presentation of FI's new publication on migration. Sandra, you have also 10 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ulysses. I would like also to extend 4 special thanks before briefly walking you through the content of this famous publication that we are launching today. And the first, before His Eminence leaves us, is really to you, Eminence, the first special thank, not only for being with us today with this at this event, but also for the forward that you kindly agreed to write for her humble publication, and it puts this publication, I think, in the right and broader context that will resonate very much with the inspiration and the motivation of our Franciscan networks and other allies. So really a very sincere thank again for that. And the second special thank goes in fact to these very Franciscan and other colleagues and friends, brothers and sisters who are living with and helping migrants every day. And this more and more putting their own lives at risk, as we saw. The third special thank goes to our co-organizers, Misean Cara, for the support to this event, but obviously also to our work more broadly, as was highlighted by John Moffett. And last but not least, a special thank to my colleague Maria Farah, who is the main author of this publication, but also to all FI colleagues and interns who contributed to it over the last month. But now let me give a very brief overview of this publication, Tearing Down the Walls, Challenging Myths about Migration from a Human Rights Perspective. And I will not be very creative. I will really follow the structure of the publication itself. And thus starting with why did we decide to write this publication at the outset? So migration and more generally speaking, human mobility has been a key issue of concern of Franciscans, as the seminars said. But we also have by now, just for example, a network in the Americas, a Franciscan network on migration, integrating Franciscan migrant houses in different countries. And so migration became very naturally, I would say, one of our thematic priorities already in our plan 2016 to 2020, and it will remain a high priority for us. But also because we were following what was going on at the UN, at the international level, with the negotiations of these two global agreements that we now have. John Moffett mentioned the compact on the Global Compact on Migration. So these two global compacts, two new agreements, the one on migration and refugees, were also very much on our agenda. And so this publication aims at recognizing the human stories and the complexity of the situation, challenging some predominant myths that we all encounter in our work and lives about migration and human mobility from a human rights perspective. And so it combines, on the one hand, the lived experiences of Franciscans and our other partners who support not only migrants, but refugees, internally displaced persons, and victims of human trafficking. With, on the other hand, some major binding, so mandatory rules, human rights standards, but also political commitments of states. So commitments that, for instance, were made through the Global Compact on Migration. And our hope is that this publication may help Franciscans, but also other faith-based groups and local civil society organizations to address and counter with the general public, but also obviously with local authorities, xenophobic discourses and abusive policies on human mobility. So as a human rights organization, FI always underscores that states have legal obligations towards migrants' rights that must be respected, protected, and fulfilled. And after that, the publication goes into giving a bit of context and offers a brief overview of the situation of human mobility worldwide, including figures and main trends. It also recaps the main international initiatives. So we mentioned the GCM, the Global Compact on Migration already, the commitments, but also the failures or weaknesses in addressing this problem and in the protection of migrants' rights. I'm not going into more details here, like for any other thing I will be saying on the publication. I just encourage everyone to look then after our events into the publication itself, so in the interest of time. The first myth that we try to challenge in this publication now, it's all migrants are the same. The individual stories of migrants, we all notice that, are often unheard. Instead, governments, media, and others have at times broadly portrayed foreigners, including migrants, as a kind of homogeneous group, so requiring one, often sadly xenophobic and racist response. And the publication notes that the UN, among others, has largely documented the stigmatization and discrimination that people on the move disproportionately face. This is true in particular for women, but also, for example, for indigenous people. And in that regard, our publication highlights one case, the case of the Warao indigenous people who fled from Venezuela to Brazil, and the situation that we have been following closely. In reality, migration flows include individuals with a whole range and a wide range of legal statuses and situations and vulnerabilities. So that necessitates state action that recognizes these differences. And the publication provides some recap on, or some summary of the terminology and the definition of the various concepts used, like refugee, asylum seekers, IDPs, and migrants. Although, of course, these definitions are not always completely set and unanimous, as we know. And this is particularly true for the term migrant, that is always vague and blurred. The second myth that we wanted to dispel through statistics is migrants only come to Europe and other rich countries. And if we look at reality, it gives a very different picture, obviously. So, for example, in 2018, the 5 countries hosting the most refugees were Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, Pakistan, and Uganda. UN statistics also show that developing countries host 86% of forcibly displaced populations. Furthermore, the UN found that international migrants mainly moved between countries located within the same region. So in that regard, our publication provides one compelling example, and that is the one of internal and regional displacement between Cameroon and Nigeria, which is again a situation that FI is particularly concerned about. After that example, the publication recalls key protections and commitments towards, among others, freedom of movement, and towards creating more pathways for regular migration. The third myth is migrants are ruining national economies and should not be allowed to work. So we have all seen attempts to demonize so-called economic migrants or migrant workers in order to create sometimes scapegoats during economic downturns. But while many migrant workers are vulnerable to violations of their rights and to exploitation, they positively contribute to the economy of the country in which they work by paying taxes, but also, and we tend to forget that, maybe not anymore so much during COVID, but that they also fill jobs in the care and health sector. Economic migrants also contribute to the development of their home country, so where they come from, through remittances, so the money sent back to the families. And in fact, the World Bank has said that the remittances have exceeded official aid towards developing countries since the mid-1990s, but has also overtaken foreign direct investment in the recent years. And so our publication comes back to a situation we have been denouncing at the UN, which is that of Indonesian domestic workers in Malaysia, to give one example of this situation. And it also recalls key international norms and commitments towards the protection of the rights of migrant workers. The fourth myth is, unlike refugees, migrants can return to their homes. And to challenge this fourth myth, our publication takes the example of climate change and natural disasters. So extreme weather events, but also slow onset impacts, such as sea level rise, are drivers of migration, obviously, but they may have irreparable consequences. And to highlight that, we chose the situation of Kiribati, as FI has been working with colleagues in this island state of the Pacific on the impacts of climate change for years, amplifying the voices and demands of our colleagues and friends at the UN, including answers to their question of how to deal with a nation whose land is increasingly uninhabitable. So today, the international community is still dealing with this question, by the way. And the publication recalls standards of protection of the right to live in dignity, as well as commitments for increased international cooperation to respond to the impacts of climate change. The last and fifth myth is migrants are willing to take the risks and states do not need to protect them during transit or upon entering their country of destination. So migrants often undertake dangerous journeys. Cardinal Czerny already talked about this, facing abuses like sexual violence, lack of access to health, arbitrary detention, and children being particularly vulnerable. At the same time, migrants often stay silent, obviously, because they fear retaliation, deportation, or they lack access to justice. And in the publication, we give examples from Franciscan migrant houses in Mexico in that regard. Many states have also implemented harsh policies to deter immigration, including increased use of border controls and repressive policies like widespread detention of migrants. And this has been a long-standing concern of Franciscans and other partners, as well as of the UN. So the publication recalls states' obligations and commitments to guarantee the protection of the right to liberty and security everyone is entitled to. And I will end this presentation and with the end of the publication that gives some ideas to learn more and become active for our readers. So with that, again, I just encourage everyone to have a deeper look into this publication, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Sandra, and thank you so much also for all the examples. As Sandra mentioned, all of these examples are situations that FI has documented and has followed. So also this publication shows precisely as well the voices, the direct voices from grassroots organizations and our Franciscans brothers and sisters and other organizations who are actually facing all these different myths. So with this, we end with the first part of this webinar. And now we're going to move on to the second part. The second part will focus on the discussions and of situations from the ground. And we will have speakers from different religious networks working with migrants also in the ground. I just want to remind everyone that if you have any question, you can already start typing your question and also telling us to who it will be addressed at the bottom of your screen in the section of Q&A. So I would like now to invite Mrs. Rosario Martinez Alvarez, who is a consultant on migration and has been collaborating closely with the Franciscan GPIC office in Guatemala. She will speak about the work of migrant houses in Central America. And I would like also to acknowledge that today we have a lot of members of the Franciscan Network on Migration from Central America, Mexico, and the United States who are also following this webinar. With this, Rosario, I give you the floor and you have 10 minutes for your presentation.
Muchísimas gracias. Saludos a todos y a todas desde Guatemala, en Centroamérica, y gracias a Franciscas por invitar a este webinar. Quisiera entonces abordar un poco el contexto de la región. En un mundo globalizado, la movilidad humana siempre representa unas expresiones más visibles, producto de un modelo neoliberal donde los conglomerados más pobres sufren los efectos de la desigualdad y la inequidad, y parecieran no tener cabida en nuestras sociedades, pero donde también la clase media está siendo empujada a la pobreza inevitablemente. Se estima que más de 300,000 personas al año, en su mayoría jóvenes, emprenden un proyecto migratorio principalmente hacia Estados Unidos, desde los países del norte de Centroamérica, Guatemala, El Salvador y Honduras. Esto significa o representa que 821 personas al día estarían migrando y cada hora 34 personas. Si este evento dura 2 horas, estaríamos diciendo que estimaríamos que 68 personas están migrando en estos momentos. Las causas de la migración. Los procesos migratorios en los países del norte de Centroamérica pues son multicausales. Han sido producto de las dinámicas sociopolíticas y económicas que se remontan a los problemas estructurales en cada país, que en los 60s dieron inicio a los conflictos armados, principalmente en El Salvador y Guatemala, pero que estuvieron afectados también a su país vecino Honduras, y que se agudizaron las situaciones políticas y causas estructurales a partir del golpe de Estado en el 2009. La magnitud de la migración en esta parte de las Américas ha alcanzado niveles que generalmente son más sintomáticos para zonas de conflicto o guerra, pero al final son efecto de las desigualdades estructurales y de las condiciones particulares de diferentes niveles de violencia creciente en la región y los efectos del cambio climático. Seguramente ustedes habrán visto en las imágenes publicadas por los medios de comunicación y redes sociales cómo la tormenta tropical ETA y la tormenta tropical Iota inundaron nuestros países. Al día de hoy, Guatemala, por ejemplo, tiene alrededor de 3 departamentos donde varias comunidades siguen inundadas, sigue lloviendo y no hay ningún cambio en su situación, ni de protección ni albergue. Eso también tiene que ver con la desprotección que tienen estas poblaciones vulnerables, principalmente indígenas. Para analizar un poco el documento que nos presentaron y Francisca en esta oportunidad, también quisimos hacer una analogía respecto a estos mitos que se dan en la migración. Regularmente se dice que en la región centroamericana son los más pobres que migran, pero regularmente las personas migrantes de los países del norte de Centroamérica migran producto de la desigualdad e inequidad y principalmente la corrupción que se presenta en estos países, que influyen en esta migración. Pero sin embargo, emprender un proyecto migratorio implica una inversión que en muchas ocasiones les compromete a algunos de por vida. Es decir, la población tiene que poner en garantía en muchas ocasiones su único activo, la tierra, para poder migrar. Y se enfrentan entre la deportación expedita, que significa tener, al regresar a Guatemala o a sus países de origen, una deuda quizás de por vida, o emprender nuevamente el viaje. Otra característica que ha tenido la migración ha sido la parafobia hacia los migrantes se ha exacerbado a través de expresiones como la xenofobia, el racismo, la discriminación, bajo la sombría del nacionalismo. No solamente se da en los países de destino, también ya vemos estas expresiones en los países de tránsito. Y eso ha agudizado su situación, es decir, los migrantes y lo que nos comparten las casas del migrante franciscanas es que los centroamericanos se mimetizan, tratan de tener un comportamiento, utilizan las expresiones locales para pasar desapercibidos. Inclusive cuando son deportados, ellos prefieren utilizar expresiones mexicanas coloquiales para lograr que sean deportados a México y no a su país de origen. Otro mito que se ha también desvanecido son solo los hombres migran. Sí existió una tendencia en los 80 en donde principalmente el jefe de familia migró, pero en la actualidad la feminización de la migración cada vez está más presente en las estadísticas. Jefas de hogar o jóvenes mujeres buscan encontrar medios de vida sostenibles en los países de destino, porque se encuentran solas, porque sus familias no les permiten continuar sus estudios o porque buscan nuevas oportunidades en países donde la matriz laboral es más amplia. Y también hemos visto, y lo mencionan en las casas del migrante y en otras condiciones que hemos ido consultando, que también se presentan los patrones patriarcales y el machismo dentro de la migración femenina. Existe un rechazo generalizado para la mujer que migra. Existe la idea de que la mujer que migra, el 90% de ellas sufrirá una violación sexual o al menos una agresión. Y eso, entonces, lo que escuchamos es un discurso de que las mujeres no deberían de migrar, pero eso también implica una visibilización negativa hacia la migración de la mujer, que lo hace porque no encuentra medios de vida sostenibles ni una oportunidad laboral. Otro mito que tenemos es los y las migrantes viajan solo al norte de América, como lo menciona el estudio. En este caso para los países del norte de Centroamérica, Estados Unidos y Canadá. Sin embargo, producto de las medidas antimigratorias y los acuerdos de cooperación de asilo firmados con Estados Unidos por estos países de la región, las personas migrantes identifican otros países, como México. La Casa del Migrante Salto de Agua nos comenta que más y más migrantes de la región de Centroamérica se están ubicando en México. De hecho, también el perfil de los migrantes ha cambiado. Nos comentaban que anteriormente eran trabajadores agrícolas o en el área de construcción y servicios. En este marco de la pandemia, lo que estamos observando es más profesionales, personas que se desempeñaron inclusive en puestos del Estado, quienes están migrando y que ven en México principalmente un país de destino. Pero también es importante indicar que la mirada se ha volcado también al sur global. Lo que se prevé o se estima es que aquellos países de la región centroamericana y sudamericana que tengan mayor estabilidad y sobre todo una matriz laboral más fortalecida, se volverá un país de destino, como lo vemos con Colombia y la migración venezolana o en Perú igualmente. Otro mito es que las políticas antimigratorias en los países de tránsito y destino han detenido la migración. Los flujos migratorios desde los países del norte de Centroamérica hacia Estados Unidos y Canadá han aumentado, incluso cuando estas políticas se han endurecido. Los estados expulsores poco o nada hacen para cambiar las causas estructurales que inciden directamente en la migración. Esto producto de que las remesas se han convertido en un componente clave de la actividad económica de nuestros países. Representan en promedio el 18% del Producto Interno Bruto de los países del Triángulo Norte. Y eso lo vemos principalmente en las proyecciones que tenía el Banco Mundial y la CEPAL en medio de la pandemia. Había proyectado una reducción de hasta el 30% de las remesas familiares en los países donde la migración se presenta en su mayoría, y en el caso particular de Honduras y Guatemala, al contrario, han tenido cifras récord en estos momentos. Es decir,
Sario, if you can start concluding.
Of course. Los contextos coyunturales nacionales y subregionales son parte intrínseca de esta modalidad migratoria. Por esto deben visibilizarse las causas estructurales que originan en primera instancia la migración a cuentagotas o características colectivas. Finalmente, la pandemia del COVID-19 no detuvo la migración. Por el contrario, en las entrevistas desarrolladas en el marco del diagnóstico sobre migración en los países del norte de Centroamérica y México, las organizaciones consultadas indican que el flujo se redujo, pero no se detuvo. Los consultados dan cuenta que los viajes VIP tomaron más auge en este marco de la pandemia, donde habían toques de queda y cierre de frontera, y rondan entre los $14,000 y $16,000. quisiera decir que hablar de migración también implica el derecho a migrar, pero también implica el derecho a no migrar en condiciones de expulsión, como sucede en los países del norte de Centroamérica. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much, Rosario, and thank you so much also for all these observations from the ground. I would like also to share with everyone that early next year we will be also publishing a diagnosis which contain also all part of these conclusions that Rosario has shared. So we will make sure as well that you will receive the invitation for this launching event. And this publication is also with the support with Misean Cara. Also to mention that the Franciscan Network on Migration will launch as well a call for applications to volunteer in the shelters located in Mexico and Central America. So also we will share this information with you. And now I would like to invite Mrs. Savia Cordeiro, who is co-founder of Imigra, a non-governmental organization in Rio de Janeiro, and is a former coordinator of the Reference and Assistance Center of Migration, CRAI, in Sao Paulo, which is also a project that has been supported and coordinated by the Franciscan Solidarity Service, CEFRAS. Savia, you have 8 minutes also for your presentation.
Thank you, Ulysses. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invitation and also for this opportunity to talk to you briefly about the situation, the underreport migrant situation in Brazil. And I decided to focus on the impact of COVID-19 in migrants' lives in Brazil. My presentation here, I will try to bring 3 main issues. The first one, social policies. The second one, papers and migratory regularization. And the last one, borders. Well, regarding access to social policies, I think the first thing that we have to say is that one of the big issues is shelter. Migrants and refugees have the right to access public shelters in Brazil, but most of these shelters are for homeless people. Only in the municipality of São Paulo and in some states in the north, like Roraima, we have specific shelters for migrants and refugees. But in a broader context, it's important to take into account that the Brazilian government has been dismantling social policies, reducing budgets for social assistance equipment and service like shelters in the last few years. Many of these shelters of this service have closed, of course, and hence the demand that we have for shelters has been much higher than what we have available right now. Talking as someone like me that has worked on the ground, I can guarantee to you that has been a quite challenging situation to guarantee access to the shelters for migrants and refugees, especially if they are family. For example, sometimes we can get a place only for the overnight, but when they have to come back every day to apply for a new place and to sleep during the night. So it's a quite difficult situation. Also, the shelters, they are in a quite precarious situation, most of them overcrowded. I'm talking about the dorms, they are composed by 10 to 30 bunk beds. Most of them, they have poor ventilation and also dimly lit rooms. So it's a quite difficult situation. When the pandemic started, there was an increase for these shelters, most because of the migrants have lost their employers and they couldn't pay for the rent. And we received even, for example, calls from consulates asking us to help them how to put the migrants in shelters. But we can see like this is a problem that we have been facing. And during the pandemic situation, we couldn't, São Paulo, specific São Paulo, they haven't created more shelters. They only opened 2 more shelters, one related to, there was a focus on people who have symptoms of COVID-19, and another one who have received positive results of COVID-19. So you can imagine how difficult it was only with more 2 open shelters. How can we be able to accommodate all these demands that were much higher during the pandemic than before? Yeah, and as I said, as the situation that we have there, we are talking, if you imagine a place with poor ventilation and overcrowded, it's not a place where you can have social distance, for example. So for us, it was, we were really concerned about the situation of the shelters. And we nowadays, it's much better. Actually, around July and August, the situation come back to the normal. But we know that nowadays that Brazil is about to hit by the new wave of COVID. So shelter is going to come back as being a big issue for us, a big concern, because we know that migrants are going to have access, and maybe shelter is going to stay a focus of COVID spread in some ways because of their situation, precarious situation. Another point related to social policy that I would like to bring today is related to the emergency benefit that the Brazilian government provided. So this social benefits, so anyone doesn't hear about that, it was a maximum of 9 installments. So the first 5 was around $112. And the last 4 ones was around $60. So you can see it's far from the amount that was that Bolsonaro said during the UN Assembly when he said that the amount was around $1,000. It's not true. And most of people, they couldn't have access to this benefit. And indeed, it was the case of many migrants. Although they had the right to access these benefits, many couldn't withdraw it because of when they get to the public bank who was responsible to make all the financial activities related to these benefit, which Caixa Econômica. What happened here was again not something new. You see, in Brazil, migrants when they especially asylum seekers, they have been denied the right to open bank accounts because the agencies don't recognize their provisional permit, which is a legal permit that allows them to stay in Brazil regularly while they are waiting for the response of their refugee application, you know. But unfortunately, the bank's agency, they don't accept it. So here, my point is that this main shortcoming to have access to the social benefits is in fact an issue related to documentation, you know, and the recognition of that. And what takes me to my second point that I would like to talk to you today, you know, since the new Brazilian migration law was published in 2017, it is said that we have a human rights approaches instead of a security approach towards migration. Especially in terms of migratory regularization. On one hand, this is true. I mean, we have been seeing an effort to expand and to make more standard all the types of regularization, of procedures to regularization in Brazil. But on the other hand, we've been facing several bureaucratic issues, especially with the federal police, which is the institution responsible for all the procedures that are related to the migratory regularization. For instance, one problem we have been facing is have access to that scheduling system. It has been quite difficult for us to find an available date to take the document, to have an appointment and take the documents to start all the procedure. So it seems something so simple, but when it occurs repeatedly, as it's been happening in São Paulo, in Brazil, it becomes an obstacle to access migrants' rights, you know. So during the pandemic, what happened is that the federal police decided to close their service and suspended all the deadlines that they have for documentation, except in case of emergency. So, but when we came to the police, to their representatives and asked them what they consider as emergency, they didn't know, they didn't say. So in the end, it was something quite discretionary, you know, they decided what they are going to consider as emergency or not. And it remains like this until August, September. So we can imagine how difficult it was for migrants who have just arrived in Brazil before the pandemic and want to become regular, or people who have lost their documents and want to make new ones, or even migrants who are irregular and decided to try to apply for any kind of regularization because of, for example, have access to the emergency benefit that I said before. So this is in Sao Paulo around July, more or less. We didn't hear any orientation from the federal police about getting their service back to the normal. So what we saw was a lot of migrants queuing in front of the federal police building, waiting for any kind of response for their demands. At the moment now in November, finally, the federal police have reopened their service, but we again have been facing a huge issue related to schedule appointments for migrants, and some people are saying that it's worse than before the pandemic. So in the end, when we look to the federal police during this pandemic situation, it was actually quite predictable, considering that this institution has been creating more and more bureaucratic obstacles to migrants have access to their rights, you know. And in some ways, it makes me think about the Foucault idea of governmentality, how important it is to us to pay attention in how these micro dynamics of power of these stakeholders, in this case, immigration issues, is important to have a look, because in the end, it's going to be crucial to the acts of rights for migrants. And my last point here, what I would like to bring is about the borders. Since the beginning of March, Brazilian government has published 22 administrative acts that limited temporarily the entrance of migrants in our country. At first, our major concern was related to the asylum seekers' rights, but most because these administrative acts, they were too vague and too generic, allowing that the borders authorities could decide whether or not they would accept asylum applications, you know. And
Xavier, you can start concluding, please.
Sure. At the moment, most of these acts have expired and things are going back to normal, except for the Venezuelan migrants. That's still all the border controls related to Venezuelan migrants still remains. So Brazil was the only country in Latin America that established this kind of border control towards a specific country during the pandemic. And although other countries maintain strong restrictions on land borders, which in the end impacts directly in Venezuelan migrants, we believe this is a gross violation. Consider that our National Committee for Refugees has already recognized that the Venezuelan migrants are being threatened by massive violation of human rights, according to the Cartagena Declaration. And also, in theory, this acknowledgement should streamline all the process of Venezuelan process for refugees, which does not happen nowadays. So have been trying to argue that with the Brazilian government, but it seems our claims are not enough. The pandemic became an excellent excuse to implement border controls, border measures against Venezuelan migrants, and in fact, based on political interests, not only in Brazil, but also in our neighboring countries. So come to the conclusion of my talk, the main argument that I tried to develop here with these examples was that all the challenges and shortcomings that migrants have been facing in Brazil during the pandemic are not new issues. They are in fact structural bottlenecks embedded in political interests that were aggravated with the pandemic. Regarding this scenario, I think it's important to highlight that have been several initiatives from different civil society organizations, actors, including migrant groups, trying to raise awareness about what is happening in Brazil nowadays and making pressure on local and federal government. Considering that Brazil is about to get into a new wave of COVID, I more than ever, I strongly believe it is important to articulate and charge an effective response from our government. I think that these are my main points I would like to bring today. Thanks again for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward for the debate.
Thank you, Xavier. Thank you so much. And just a reminder for our attendees that the publication will be published after this event. And I will also share the links on different languages so you can also get access to it. And also a reminder that you can already start putting your questions in Q&A. We're already receiving some, and I see that some of our panelists are already replying, but we will also come back to them after our last speaker. So now I would like to give the floor to Mark Potterton, the principal of the Sacred Heart College from South Africa, who will speak about access to education and employment for refugees, the 326 project of the Maris Brothers in South Africa. So Mark, you have also 8 minutes to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and good morning, everybody. Buenos dias, buenos dias. I'm going to share screen, so I'll speak to the PowerPoint presentation. I need to be allowed to share my screen, so if the host could just allow me to do that. The talk really focuses on the crisis on top of a crisis we have. We've had a crisis with refugees and refugee education in our country, but the pandemic has brought further crisis. I'm going to switch over to the presentation now. There we go. Hope you can all see it. Our project has got a 12-year track record in Johannesburg. We've had 2,400 children go through the project. We've taught 12,000 lessons, served 600,000 meals. We're part of the Migrants International movement, and our main purpose in the project is to provide access, bridging access for refugee, migrant, and migrants in schools. I'm just, yeah. So, mathematics, life skills, and we also have holiday enrichment. We have transport, offer transport, nutritious meals, food parcels, and we provide financial support when the children leave our schools and go into the public schools. But the most important thing is when children are with us, we allow them to be children again. There are 225 children in our project at the moment. As you all know, the world is struggling with the pandemic at the moment, and COVID-19 is spreading very fast all over the world and has impacted on just about every country on the planet. In our country, the first case of COVID-19 was announced on the 5th of March. The state president then announced a state of national disaster, and the government structures were mobilized as they were in many parts of the world. Schools were closed from the 18th of March until for over a month. Gatherings were prohibited. All the precautions that have been taken in other parts of the world. Importantly, the economy was shut down, and that has had a lot of impact on people, particularly our economy, because of the restriction of movement and people not being able to move and go to work. There was a dramatic decline of goods. The government shut down operations of non-essential industries to stop the spread of the disease, and some industries were closed. The economy shrank by 51% in the second quarter, and that is huge, the biggest decline in a century. So that economic impact has been felt on the refugee community here. We have approximately 2 million foreign-born migrants and refugees living in South Africa. The containment measures adopted by the government throughout the lockdown has really deepened the unequal treatment of asylum seekers and refugees in our country. And this, and the government has not always made it easy for the refugee community to benefit from the programs that were put in place to mitigate against the impact of COVID. So for refugee communities, there have been three areas are affected, and we've got firstly a health crisis with people living in unsanitary and crowded living conditions, compromised access to health services because of COVID. Many people weren't accessing medical care because of all documentation was put on hold, and there hasn't been much deportation of refugees, but it's just meant that some refugees have not been able to access bank accounts because their documents have expired and access other benefits. And our Department of Home Affairs will only start allowing them to get new permits or refugee permits in January. That's next year. Then, of course, the socioeconomic impact has been rising unemployment, and especially for poor people, and that would include a lot of refugee of the community. And as some of the other presenters have already said, there's a decline in remittances because people don't have money to send back to their home countries. So where do our children come from on a daily basis? Most of the children in our school programs, we've got 3 sites, live in high-rise buildings like this. This is quite a nice looking building where I'm putting the arrow, but if you look on the left, you can see they're normally quite run-down, slum-like buildings in the city, and families living in one room. This example gives you an example of a refugee community. You see there are no cupboards and storage space, but often they have to cook, bath, wash, all in one room. Very crowded conditions, and not easy, as Rosario was saying, to practice social distancing and that, and under those conditions. So at the start of the pandemic, we continued to operate from the homes of our children. So in those conditions, our teachers WhatsApped the pupils and sent homework to the pupils. They were in communication every day, and these are refugee teachers who work in the project itself. We were able to get textbooks home to the children at one point, and as I said earlier, they were using the WhatsApp to guide children through the work. We also provided additional money to teachers for data. The pictures just show you there, you can see the children social distancing, sanitizer being sprayed before they get onto the transport. You can see the mask wearing, and we've got space between the desks. And during the lockdown, we raised about 540,000 Rand from our donors and also from generous people in the country and religious organizations, including the Muslim community, and to support food packages to people at home. When we returned to school, we had a staggered timetable. As you can see, we also social distance and made sure that we were taking precautions to protect our children. Up until now, we've had no children that have been exposed to COVID-19. Not that we know of, touch wood. You can see on one of our campuses, the children are preparing to go home, and you can see them even keeping a distance, and they're wearing masks. And in this picture here, you can see something that we initiated after children came back to school. We were able to organize 3 camps. So we had some funding, and we took the older children, not the younger children, on into the countryside, and we basically had lots of team building, lots of fun activities for them, good meals, and yeah, you can see them doing a challenge in this photograph. COVID also brought a lot of strain to families, caused mainly by financial pressure and not knowing where they'd get the next meal, and a lot of stress in families. And so we developed a partnership with the Johannesburg Parent Counseling and Child Counseling Center, and we have 6 psychologists working on our campuses twice a week, working with children who have got issues and problems. so to sort of come towards the close, on the right-hand side, you can see more images from the camp. You must remember that most of these children that we work with have never been out of the city. They've lived in those high-rise buildings, and here you can see the kind of fun activities they're doing outside and in the countryside. Our mandate is to educate, but we realized that we had to mobilize resources to help the families, mainly with food support during this time, because many families had no access to food, and that because of the exclusion from government programs. So that was the first lesson we have from the impact of COVID-19. It was to mobilize resources, to contact our funding partners and ask them if we could shift some of the funding we had to fund some of the food programs. The second big mandate that we had was to ensure safety of the children. So we purchased masks, sanitizers. We actually changed the timetable to have fewer children on campus, and that was one way to ensure the safety of children. We also had to take more precautions when we prepared meals, because we serve meals every day with the children. We also had to adapt the curriculum. Because we couldn't have all the children together in the classroom when we spaced the days out, we had alternate days that the children attended school. So one group attended on Monday, the next group on a Tuesday, and we worked on the Saturday as well. We were lucky enough to raise some additional money to pay some overtime money to the teachers to allow us to do this.
Dear Mark,
Our
you can
big
start
aim was
concluding,
to try
please.
to keep. I'm concluding now. Our big aim was to keep things going as normally as possible. So we tried to create a normal situation in an abnormal time. And the last point I'm going to make is that we had to be aware of the primary and secondary needs of children. And that's, as we move into the new year, we know that those are things that we're going to have to be aware of and continue to do in our project. So thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you so much, Mark. And also thank you so much for also drawing parallels of the situation that is happening not only in South Africa, but that we can see replicated in Brazil, but also in Central America. We still have some time for some questions and answers. And as I mentioned, there are already some questions that were already answered, but I think that other comments can also be addressed by other panelists. So one of the questions coming is like, there are a lot of migrants returning home because of COVID-19 pandemic. As a result, they lost their jobs and incomes. Do you have experiences how the government, like in Guatemala or Latin America, deals with that returnees in terms of providing their basic needs, social protections, and jobs at their home countries? And we see here that Rosario already answered some of these questions, but I don't know if, for example, Savia, if you have any other comment related to this one. And I will also take another question that is here, which says that, and this is in Spanish, which are the countries who has in their territory the biggest percentage of migrants? And I guess that maybe also Sandra, because Sandra provided some numbers already that can also like address the situation. However, if anyone has any other comment on this, please do not hesitate to intervene. So Savia, if you want to answer.
Yeah, I don't think that from Brazil I can add some information about the returning migrants, because in Brazil this is an issue that is still not so discussed among us, and especially even the civil society, you know, that usually is more innovative and is ahead of the government. I've been heard about, because I'm here in London and I'm in connection with contact with some organizations, British organizations that work with Brazilian communities. And last week I talked to them and they told me that there's some Brazilians such Brazilian women that are here and they have been detained and they are going back. And they asked me if I knew if there was any kind of support, social support for these women. And as I was going to say, no, there isn't. I mean, the only thing that we have nowadays in Brazil, not specific for COVID, but it's help from the IOM. They have a specific project for returnees, and I don't know how it's working nowadays during the pandemic, but usually it's a specific one with some countries. Nowadays, there is one related to Portugal, Brazilian migrants in Portugal that want to return, and they have to give some financial support and social support to these people. But we don't have any kind of this thinking when we think about the pandemic situation, unfortunately. And it's a problem because we don't even know the numbers, if there are actually Brazilians. This is one of the main problems of Brazil. Our numbers, they are really unreported. So it's difficult to implement public policies, don't having the real numbers, isn't it?
Thank you, Savia. Sandra, you wanted also to make some comment? Mark, yes, Mark, I saw that you have also like a comment on this regarding South African refugees. If you want to add something. Mark?
Yeah, I just put the comment in the box. I won't add anything so people can continue.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So then I will give the floor then to Sandra.
Yeah, thank you very much. So concerning the question on the countries receiving or having the highest number of migrants, so I only mentioned a couple of figures in my very brief introduction, but you will find more figures in the publication. And obviously figures are moving quickly, right? So we had to, I mean, we started this publication at one point, so I'm not saying that the figures I will be mentioning now are the most updated, but it gives a good picture, I think, already of this wrong picture that many of us have, especially in the so-called Western countries. So where, for instance, in Europe, where I am based, we have always this impression, or we were given a lot this impression that it was an invasion, right, at a point between some refugees and migrants waves. But as a matter of fact, as I mentioned already, from the figures in 2018, the countries hosting the most refugees, among the 10, there is only one country, like developed country of the north, and it's Germany, because Germany accepted, as you may all have heard, over a million Syrian refugees and other refugees at one point, and continues to receive a lot of migrants and refugees. But otherwise, I mentioned the 5 first, and the other ones are including Ethiopia, Sudan, and Bangladesh. And Bangladesh is one of the poorest countries in the world, right? So just restating this fact. Then I also mentioned that 86% of the internally displaced or the forcibly displaced populations were in developing countries. And then actually out of over 1 billion migrants overall in the world, 763 million, so a big majority, were actually staying within their own borders, but the rest is international migrants, right? And among these international migrants who pass borders, cross borders, Europe and North America have approximately 82 million and 52 million of these out of these 300 something million. So you can see, of course, there are many migrants going to Europe and to North America for especially job or work opportunities. But we also have to be careful about what kind of migrants we are counting in these numbers. Because obviously I'm a migrant worker, for instance. I'm French, but I worked in Switzerland. but I'm counted in migrants figures. I'm not, I wouldn't dare comparing my situation with a Guatemalan worker or person who is trying to reach North or the US to find better opportunities. So again, we have also to see what kind of specific or individual realities are behind these figures. So I would stop here unless, yeah.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And now I would like to also give the floor to George Hegarty, who is also here with us. He is from Irish Aid and is a focal point on migration and development. George, you wanted to address as well a couple of comments. You have 1-2 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't even know if I'll need 2 minutes. No, thank you very much for this. It's extremely interesting to have had a glimpse at what this report shows. I suppose in some respects, coming at it from the government perspective is slightly different than coming at it from the civil society perspective. We would have probably a more positive estimation of the Global Compact, for example. You know, I mean, it's true that it doesn't satisfy all that civil society would have wished for. But I think in some respects, the fact that it's largely about reiterating previously existing obligations is not in itself a bad thing. I mean, this report today, to an extent, is doing something very similar. It's taking existing human rights obligations, linking them to the subject of migration, and by creating those links and putting those links out there publicly, it's not in itself a bad thing to do. So, of course, the Global Compact was the result of sometimes quite fractious negotiations, and I think all things considered, it was about as good a result as we could have expected to get. So I would think that it gives us a good network, it gives us a good framework, if you like, for going forward, and that is something that we should be positive about. What I really wanted to talk about briefly was I suppose the kind of the underlying idea here, the very title of the report itself, myth busting. I think there has been a really strong realization over the past couple of years that myth busting is the linchpin for getting progress on the Global Compact. For as long as migration is a politically difficult issue, for as long as it is easy to make migrants scapegoats, it will be something that will happen. And it will also make it difficult for governments sometimes to do things that they might want to do, but that they feel they don't have public support for. So myth busting is absolutely crucial. And I think there are a few things to be aware of. First of all, there is work going on. There's the work that you're doing here. You've got something like the Global Forum on Migration and Development has a working group specifically looking at migration narratives, and Ireland is involved in that group, and they're working on campaigns at the moment. Ireland is also working directly with the International Organization for Migration on setting up what we're calling a Global Migration Media Academy, which is aimed at providing training essentially to media professionals in a number of developing countries. The countries in question are Kenya, Nigeria, Mexico, Morocco, and Vietnam. And again, to equip them better to have the tools to be able to address misleading or deliberately, deceptive narratives on migration. Because part of the problem, of course, is that it's not only that there are narratives out there which are not founded in fact, there are narratives out there that are very deliberately not founded on fact. And that's something that we have to be extremely aware of. And there are some pretty negative forces out there. But I think that a small note of caution, well, caution might not be the right word, but simply to bear in mind that getting the message out there is one thing, but recently we had the regional review for Europe of implementation of the Global Compact for Migration. And one of the speakers at that, somebody who made an excellent presentation, was a man called Tim Dixon, who works with a kind of a social entrepreneur consultancy type outfit called More in Common. And they work on, if you like, trying to heal fractures within societies, not just on issues like migration, but for example, the fractures that exist within, a country like the United States, or, it's something that's much more than just about migration. But the key thing that Tim Dixon came out with is the need to understand the audience. In other words, if you're in the business of trying to change people's minds, you've really got to think beyond, I know the message I want to get out. You have to think, what is the message that is going to be effective with this audience? And
I think, George, if you want to conclude.
Yeah, no, I will finish up very quickly, but simply to bear in mind that one of the key findings of the research that they've done is that there are limits to the effectiveness of fact-based communication if people have entrenched views of migrants as the other. In other words, you can produce as many facts as you like. If people think of migrants as the other, the facts won't work. And my last point, which I think is important, is that seeing people as, oh, those poor people who need my help, is in itself othering.
Thank you so much, George.
Thank you.
And because we are running out of time and there are also other questions that are not addressed, I will just mention these questions and I will ask the participants that in your concluded remarks, you can just mention any points to answer these questions, and also to give you the floor for 1 minute to conclude. So the questions here is that, well, if there is any differentiated attention or support for migrant women. I see Rosario already responded, but maybe Savia in your closing remarks. And also another question here is that we are focused on to improve the mechanisms of protection of migrants, but what about to decrease the expulsion? So if you can address these two last questions in your closing remarks. So I will start with Rosario. You have 1 minute to conclude and maybe answer briefly this question.
Gracias. Sí, efectivamente se hace necesario desarrollar política no solo nacional y regional para atender la migración a partir de sus diferentes perfiles, a partir de la atención de las mujeres, incluyendo los grupos LGTBIQ que cada vez más están migrando, y principalmente en caravanas. Se requiere esa protección. Creo que desde los países del norte de Centroamérica, las acciones que han emprendido los países siguen siendo muy limitadas. Necesitamos todos los actores, sociedad civil, academia, grupos organizados, inclusive las asociaciones de migrantes en Estados Unidos, tanto de guatemaltecos, centroamericanos y salvadoreños, necesitan incluirse en estas estrategias de atención a los migrantes. Considero que atacar las causas estructurales que generan la migración van a ser el punto de quiebre para reducir la migración irregular y atender a lo que promueve el Pacto Mundial de las Migraciones. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Rosario. I'll give the floor now to Savia for concluding remarks as well.
Well, answering related to the assistance for women, to migrant women, in Brazil, we don't have a specific public service for that. We have a specialized service for women, and these services have been receiving capacity building related to the situation of migrant women. If this is enough, I don't know. I don't think so. I think we need more. I really believe that we need specialized service specific for migrant women, since we've been seeing how invisible the tragic stories of these women has been. So, but in Brazil, all the times that we need help, support for these women, we took them to these specialized service. Having a concluding mark, I think it is important to take into account nowadays facing this pandemic, this challenge that has been this pandemic, and looking at the global compact pact for migration. It's important to understand that this responsibility of having a safe, orderly, and regular migration is a responsibility of the state and not the migrants. Because I think sometimes it's not so clear to everyone. And because people will migrate, they will. It doesn't. And I think that the pandemic situation is the clear example what happened. That even with all the problems, all the borders closing, people still migrate. So I think we have to take into account to think about what our action is going to be in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Savia. I now give the floor to Mark.
All I'd like to just say is that in April, there were 1 out of every 10 children not in school. And that out of schoolness of children really impacted on children's learning, and it will impact for many, many years. So the challenge around the world is to ensure that the impact of learning is minimized, especially for refugee children, because that decreases their life chances if they don't have adequate education.
Thank you so much, Mark. Now give the floor for a concluding remark to Sandra.
Okay, I could say a lot, but I will restrict myself to a couple of comments, and starting with something that I think Savia came back to on the responsibility of states in making sure that migration is orderly and regular and regulated, etc. I think this is what I also alluded to when I said that as a human rights organization, FI is insisting on state obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill the rights of everyone. So that's one clear thing that I want to say also on our take on the situation and how we approach this. But also, I think what struck me in everybody's presentation, like Mark, Rosario, and Savia, is the role of civil society and faith-based groups in particular to step in whenever the other measures and the other actors are not managing or are not willing to comply with the requirements or with the entitlements and the obligations. The third thing is that I think was raised by this question on the causes of forced mobility or migration. I think Rosario gave already some elements of answer, but I think all the work that FI is doing, for instance, on extractives, on climate change, on environmental degradation, on extreme poverty, is in fact also tackling the causes for forced mobility, let's say, or migration. And the last point would be just to reflect on what our colleague from Irish Aid, George Hegarty, said. I think I agree. I mean, as you noticed, we are maybe very critical because we have to deal with a dire daily situation of refugees and migrants. But we did extracted what we thought are really great commitments from the Global Compact on Migration in this publication. As you highlighted, it's not only human rights standards, but it also the corresponding commitments from the GCM that we also highlighted in the publication. So I hope this will be also helpful. And our publication is actually really or was supposed to be really a humble contribution to support the work, especially of our Franciscan and other faith-based partners who are working in shelters, migrant houses, etc. So yeah, I hope it will do this job. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And finally, I will give the floor to John Moffett to also give concluding remarks and also to officially close this event. John, you have 1 minute as well for this.
Great. Thank you, Ulysses. I think, I mean, the previous speakers have kind of covered all of the notes that I had taken down, but I would like to just add, you know, it's been great to be part of this launch today of the publication on Tearing Down the Walls and Debunking the Myths Associated with Migration, which is now available, and thanks to Ulysses for kind of posting that in the chat. So hopefully people can download that now or straight after the meeting and start using it. And maybe just to circle back to some of the points that His Eminence Cardinal Michael Czerny was making at the start as part of our opening remarks. But I think something for me to take away from the meeting today is certainly this idea of cultivating the culture of encounter. That it's okay to live our lives comfortably in the culture in which we're, you know, born and understand, but it doesn't stop us from striving for the good of humanity and reaching out and helping others. And I think that's really important to remember that, you know, we can encounter, reach out, help others without it being uncomfortable to ourselves. And maybe that's where we need to kind of put ourselves in the position of the person who's receiving the message and speak to them at the level that they want to start to engage in the conversation around debunking the myths of migration. Thank you all for listening. Can I say a big thank you to Franciscans International for setting up the meeting today, for all of the time, effort and energy that's gone into arranging this. It's been great to be part of it, and it's great to be able to co-host it with you on the launch of this publication. So thank you all very much. And Ulysses, thank you very much for your excellent chairing. Really appreciate it.
John, thank you so much. And as you mentioned, the publication is now available. It's now going to be also different languages in our website. The links have been shared in the chat, but we are also going to share this with all of you. As well, we're going to send around the recording of this event, so you can also share it widely. And finally, on behalf of Franciscans International Misean Cara, I would like to thank you, all the panelists, for your inputs and your contribution and your comments. And I would like also to take this opportunity to thank all the participants and attendees to this meeting. And yes, of course, and the interpreters. Thank you so much, interpreters, for all the great work that you did today. So thank you so much, really appreciate it. And I wish everyone all the best, and let's continue connecting all the ground with what is happening in other countries. Have a nice day.